Great, thank you everyone. If you don't mind taking your seats, we'll get started with our next speaker. So, what to do when it all goes wrong? This sounds a bit ominous, but I can't wait to see where this session goes. So, we're in the midst of a global FinTech boom, which will help drive COVID recovery here and abroad. For this session, we're joined by Tim Dickinson, co-CEO of Assembly Payments, who offer integrated online payment solutions. Tim is committed to making sure Australia doesn't fall behind global innovation in the FinTech industry and can retain and grow its people and ideas. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you. Hello. How do I move the slides on? Let's see how this goes. Very good. So I'm Tim. I work at Assembly, for those of you that don't know. And I have been with Assembly for 4.5 years. It feels like a lot longer than that. When I joined Assembly, I joined as an integration engineer, helping people connect our tech stack into their tech stack. I've done that, I hope to think reasonably well. Some of you are probably customers of Assembly. You probably know who I am. We help solve payments for digital platforms. That's very simple to say. The specificity of that will come as I continue to talk. But we recently have partnered with an international organisation, which I can cover in a second. But something I want to kind of talk about today is not Assembly necessarily, even though I am going to do some bragging in a second. In 2020, we partnered with Standard Chartered. Some of you will probably know who Standard Chartered is. They're a bank. They're very big. They've been a good friend to us. They've opened up corridors for us, new markets, expertise, helped us kind of pave the way to do things really, really well. And recently, we announced a merger with a company called Currency Fair. And so soon, we won't be called Assembly. Don't ask me what we will be called, because we don't know. But we will rebrand, and we will come out strong. We have a nice little story here. So we were founded in 2013. We grew across the US and Australia. We have offices in the Philippines. We have offices in Singapore. We have a presence in Pune, the United States, and so on. We were the first non-bank to launch services on the MPP, so that was kind of cool for us. And recently we passed an 11 billion milestone for our payment volume, which is kind of cool. And that looks like that. We all like hockey sticks, and I'm sure all of you have your own version of this. This one for us represents the money moved through our platform. It's very simple. I'm not going to tell you any more detail than this, and I've taken the numbers off just in case. But hockey sticks are one of those things that they're really exciting to have happen, right? And so we've had the hockey stick happen in the last few years. But as many of you probably expect, COVID really accelerated that for us. And part of that was the fact that Standard Chartered helped us, but also people moved to the cloud. And so we could continue to help people solve these problems at scale, and we've seen huge growth. And that came with some interesting challenges, which have been fun to solve. But I don't want to talk about how awesome it's been at Assembly and how good we are. I want to talk about something a little bit different. So sometimes it doesn't all go according to plan. And so there's something that's happening at the moment in Australia that I want to talk about that many of you may have contributed to, you may have experienced, you may have seen, you may know someone who is impacted by this at the moment. And I want to kind of cover off some of the ways that we have seen people navigate that, how we've helped people navigate that, and what we'd like to see from Australia, be it from a regulatory environment, the banks, or the FinTech community, and how we solve this. So before I talk about that, we did a little bit of a therapy thing at Assembly, and we had a Slack channel called Confessions of a FinTech, because sometimes you don't do it the right way. And what we would do in that Slack channel is kind of tell one another the times it went really, really bad, partly to get it off your chest, also to laugh about it, but also to show the new people when they join, this is where we've come from. We used to do things this way. We don't do it that way anymore. And so that's been really, really good for us as kind of like an activity to laugh at ourselves. And so I'm going to run through some stories soon, and I hope you laugh. If you don't laugh, I'll be offended. But there has been some absolute horror stories that we've seen in the space, right? And so I'm not going to go into the detail of any of them just yet. But what I want to talk about is what is called debanking unbanking, or as Simon Lee, who's not here because he has a massive hangover, has kind of coined it, is being banked, is kind of what he says. And so imagine what that compound word means. But essentially it means that as a FinTech, if you have your financial services ripped from underneath you and you can no longer move money around, pay your people, or participate in the network, you're screwed. And so we've seen this happen too often. And so we made some really good friends who this has happened to as well, and we've been able to solve it together. And so what I want to talk about is how we solve this in the interim, but also the fact that we won't be able to solve this on our own without the help from the banks and the regulators. And so I know that some of you may have contributed to the FinTech Australia papers on this. Please continue to do that. Please, help out. If you have been unbanked, don't put your hand up if you don't want, but come and talk to us later if you need to. We can help, but so can FinTech Australia. One thing to remember is it's probably not personal. It might be, but chances are pretty good it's not you. What we're seeing at the moment in the Australian space is fear driven by a regulator who I won't name, and that is rippling through the banking system. And so one of the challenges we've got with our customers, aside from the fact we want to keep the revenue line really, really high and make sure my customers keep running, is that generally causes people to stutter, and then it distracts them, it slows their momentum down, and it's happening at a time when Australia's in a really unique, lucky position. Not only have we been able to navigate COVID like no one else has been able to, we are growing our FinTech space and we're exporting this to the world. We don't want that to slow down. Brand Australia needs to be pushing this outside the world or we'll continue to import it. And we don't want that. We have a lot of smart people here and we should be pushing this globally. Now, banks can make great investors. We've had a few. They're good, but don't expect them to bank you. And so that's been a lesson that we've kind of learned over the years is, we partner with Standard Chartered. We don't run any of our financial services through Standard Chartered by design. And so the reason we don't do that is because if we start to cross over those things, it makes it a little bit harder to unweave things when we need to launch in new markets and they're not there. And so we've built our entire stack to not use the investor banks. And so for those of you that potentially have a bank that is investing and they're offering you access to payment rails and things, use more than one bank. Because if you do get debanked, it's going to suck. It's going to be really hard to unwind all your stuff from that. So have lots of backup plans. If a bankering, as I'm going to call it, does occur, be upfront about it. Because if people hear that you've been unbanked in the network through other people and the rumour mill spreads, it won't be good. And so tell your customers, your partners, your staff, get more brains on the problem because help can come from some unexpected places sometimes. And if you're hiding it or you're trying to control it or you're worried that it's going to get out, that could actually hurt you a lot more than if you just said, hey, we've got an issue at the moment. Can you help us solve it? Here's what might happen. But just be upfront. Have more than one plan. So I won't go into too much detail, but we have been unbanked before. We know what it feels like. So believe me when I say this, don't put all your eggs in one basket. If you are unbanked and you're having trouble running banking services and your customers are going to be impacted, don't run at one option. Have multiple options available to you. And don't run them all yourself. Get help. Because it might look like it's going to pay off, but on the 27th of December, just before things get turned off, it might not work, as we experienced. And so have lots of plans. And share your problem. This is a big one, right? So we have a lot of allies in the banking space. We have a lot of investors who are banks. And so we started to kind of contact them and say, hey, here's the problem we've got. And they're like, haha, you're not alone. And so it did feel personal, right? Is when you're up against this and it's Christmas Day and you're supposed to be cooking lunch with everybody for your family and instead you're on the phone with everyone you can find because you're trying to bring things back together and you're trying to save it, the more people you've shared that problem with, the more likely you are to solve it. And so we had our entire network and alliance helping us solve these problems at one point in time, and we solved it really well. And we solved it a lot quicker than we thought, and we came out unscathed. We didn't lose any customers, and it was great. But that's not how it felt like at the time. And so if you are going through this, come and have a chat, because I know what you feel like, and we can help you, by the way. And so this is where I kind of want to ask some questions of you, and it might be a bit confronting for some of you to put your hand up, but has anyone here been unbanked? Do you know anyone who has? You guys can all put your hands up. So we have quite a few of our customers that we know have been unbanked in the past, or at the moment they're kind of looking at potentially that might be something that's happening. And so there are lots of ways that the FinTech community in Australia can actually help. Just because you don't have a bank doesn't mean you can't keep running. And so you don't necessarily need to replace everything you've just lost with exactly the same thing. There are things that you can continue to do to make sure that you can service your customers. And so something else I want to kind of talk about is ask for help. That's obvious. But I've been through this a few times. If you need advice, if you need a hug, if you need a shoulder to cry on, if you want someone to kind of help you solve this, come and talk to me. We know what this feels like. We've seen it lots of times. Our customers go through it fairly frequently. The bank friend that we have in Standard Chartered, they've been unbanked. And so it's not that uncommon, right? And so I just want people to kind of remember that we are a community and we have to solve this one together. And yeah, if you need help, we're here. I'm going to stop talking. Does anyone have any questions? Don't be afraid. I will also just say I refuse to answer. Yes?
I think it's time you you actually came clean and told us who unbanked you, and I'd actually love for you to. Well, you don't have to, but it would be really good to hear the short version of what you did in those imminent, 24, 48 hours to stay in business.
Yeah. I'll gladly tell this story. So on the 30th of November, we received a letter from a bank that I will not name, giving us 28 days to find another bank. 30th of November is before Christmas. Lots of people are going through change freezes, taking leave. It was probably the worst time for this to happen. I was on holiday for the first time in 3 years with my family. And so I was up in Bright, and I had to then spend the next 4 days on the phone, working while I was on holiday, solving this. But the first thing I did is I called the other banks I knew. I said, hey, I need a hand. And so we also called some people that aren't banks, but they can help us in other ways, and they didn't help us directly, but they knew people who could. And so there's a lot of people that when we kind of started to share our problem, they're like, oh yeah, this happened to so-and-so a month ago, call these guys. And so when we started to share what had happened, very quickly we realised this isn't actually that much of a problem. We can solve this quite quickly, we just have to get to work and go and do that. Now the hardest thing for us was it was Christmas nearly, right? So that meant that we had some compressed timeframes to work in. But it's also not the first time we've seen the bank that debanked us, debank people like us. And so, at the time it felt really personal, it really did. But when we then kind of started to talk to everyone, they were like, oh yeah, us too. And then we just found that there was hundreds of people that had been through it. So, yeah, if you buy me a beer later, I might tell you who it was. Or you can guess.
Me? Oh. Hello, Tim.
Hello, Sophie.
What are you thinking that FinTech Australia should put in their submission about this issue?
So this is a hard one. I think that the banks are not the problem, necessarily. I think those of us that are building globally scalable FinTech platforms that are going to run in multiple markets, we know what we're doing, right? And a lot of us have had bank friends in, and they've shown us the way to do things the right way. But we still need the banks to do certain things. And so that's an opportunity, but it's also a threat, right? Is if we rely too heavily on them and then they suddenly debank you, it's really disruptive. And so something that we see happen in other markets is direct access to scheme. And so there are things that we want to start seeing in Australia that can be opened up to FinTechs, so you don't have to rely on a bank giving you access and being afraid of what you might be doing because their systems aren't set up to accept the data. If we just moved to more of a system where the data was part of the compliance and then the payment moved, we probably wouldn't have these problems. And so, we're connecting into SEPA, we're connecting into FAST, we're connecting all these networks all over the world, and a lot of them comply by default. And so you avoid a lot of the issues that the banks are afraid of on this side of the world.
Whilst I'm waiting for other people to ask questions, I had somebody come to see me, I'm a lawyer, and they wanted to start a campaign effectively to tell the government that really having a bank account is effectively a human right. What do you think about that?
I tend to agree in one respect because it's very difficult to exist in society without one. Much like internet access is probably a human right. Like it's really hard to live in the modern world without these things. I don't think the banks would agree with that. Because then they can't fire you whenever they want. Like I don't want to hate on banks, right? Some of the banks we work with are brilliant, they're amazing. But we are a lot smaller than them, and if they run into hard times, they don't care about you. And so you've got to make sure you're backed up somehow.
Tim, thanks for the presentation. just do you have any advice or tips for a small fintech dealing with the power asymmetry, trying to negotiate with, mega partners, where just how to approach it, especially as we're about to move, kind of mission critical parts of our stack onto their platform? Any advice on how we should think about going about it?
Without knowing the specifics of what you're talking about, if you can run kind of things in parallel, and so if you are having to integrate to a bank and use all of their infrastructure, see if you can still integrate to a secondary just in case. Because even if you have, your ally who is a bank has all the best intentions in the world, they can still go down. And so just from a service reliability perspective, you should still have a backup. And so I think, if you can negotiate to do those things, I would do that.
Tim, what about MPP? What about, you talked about going direct to a scheme, the open banking structures of the future. Do you feel as though that's going to ease the problem or not?
I certainly hope it does. And so, we talk to MPP a lot. We know Adrian really well, and we love the stuff. We were the first non-bank on the network, right? So it's, as payments nerds, it's the holy grail for us. Like, you get to move stuff really fast. You get all the data about it. The use cases are amazing. Like, it's a fantastic piece of public infrastructure. But you still have to go through the banks for it. And so that means that if you're trying to innovate in a way that the banks don't like, it might be blocked, despite the fact there might actually be nothing wrong with that. And so, we need to kind of ask ourselves as a country, and if we're setting up regulatory regimes, they need to cater to innovation. And so at the moment, it feels like they're catering to control. And so that's, we've got to look at that as a country and do something about it, I think. Thank you. Oh. Maybe later. Definitely later. Yeah, right. If there's nothing else, thank you.
Thank you, Tim. That was awesome. Yeah, I was also keen to see some screenshots of the Slack channel, but that's all right. We've got about 5 minutes till the next session, so feel free to take a bathroom break or have a chat, and we'll get started in a few minutes.